I want to tell you about a village, not as a story about the past, as evidence. In the village where I grew up, nobody was suffering from mental health. Not because life was easy, not because there was no pain, no quarrel, no loss, but because the architecture of that life did not produce the conditions that break a person from the inside. Let me show you what I mean. In my village, the family was not husband and wife. The whole village was the family. Your children were not only your children, because your children were going to contribute to the society of the village. Everybody was meant to raise a child. If someone found you doing something you shouldn't be doing, it didn't have to be your father. It didn't have to be your mother. You could be corrected anywhere by anyone and nobody raised an eyebrow, because it was understood this child belongs to all of us. Nothing was monetized. If a man had a mango tree and you were hungry, you asked, and he would say, take what you want. If you didn't have enough seed for the new farming season, you went to your neighbor. You said, your yams were so good this year. Can I use from your seed stock for next season? And they gave it. No interest, no contracts, no debt installments. Because the logic of the village was not transaction. It was reciprocity. You give because someday you will need. And when you need, it will be there. And if a man fell sick during farming season and could not attend to his farm, the village organized. The youth came. The farm did not fall behind. The man's crisis did not become his collapse because the village absorbed the cost. Now, I want you to hold that image while I ask you a question. What do you call a system that ensures no one falls through the crack? In Europe, they call it social safety net. They built it in the 20th century. They are very proud of it. They spend billions administering it, and it still has gaps wide enough to swallow people whole. My village built the same system out of relationships, out of proximity, out of the understanding that your neighbor's survivor was connected to yours. They called ours primitive. In the village, there would be a woman filled with wisdom, a woman that other women looked up to. And the women of the village, because of how close they lived, because of how much time they spent together, they could see when another woman was beginning to act strange in her home. Not strange in a clinical sense, strange in the sense that something was off, something had shifted, something needed attention. And because they were close enough to see it, they could respond to it before it became a crisis, before it became a breakdown, before it required intervention. This is what proximity does. Not surveillance, not gossip. Proximity as care. The closeness of the village meant that no one's inner deterioration could happen in private long enough to become irreversible. There was always someone watching, not to judge, but because they were genuinely close enough to notice. Western psychology had a concept for what that woman was doing. They call it early intervention. They fund programs. They train professionals. They build systems to achieve what the proximity of my village life produced automatically. And they still cannot replicate it. Because you cannot replicate relationship with a program. You cannot replicate being known with a 45-minute section once a week with someone who is paid to listen. My grandfather was a stranger in that land. He came from somewhere else. At first, there was resistance. He was not immediately welcomed. But my grandfather was a great herbalist. He knew plants. He knew healing. He was also a strong farmer. A man who worked, who contributed, who showed his character through what he brought to the community. And gradually, the village accepted him, not because he performed acceptance, because he earned belonging through the quality of his presence. He treated their sick. He worked his land. He raised his family. He married 2 wives. The village that once resisted him made him one of their own. This is not just a family story. I tell you this because my grandfather's story contained the entire logic of indigenous integration. Belonging was not given automatically. It was demonstrated through conduct, through contribution, through the willingness to live by the ethics of the community. The ethic was simple. Do unto others what you would have done to you. Not as a religious instruction, as the operating law of the land. Any quarrel that arose, any disputes between neighbors was judged by that standard. And any man who held himself to that standard could be the voice that settled the dispute. Not because of his title, because of his character. This is what good character as the foundation of everything. Not faith, not ritual alone. Character. The village my grandfather entered was not governed by a church. It was governed by an ethic that preceded the church by centuries. And let me show you what happened when that system was replaced. Europe has 9 psychiatrists per every 100,000 people. Africa has 0.05. The joint UNICEF and WHO reports published in 2023 puts it in the starkest term possible. Sub-Saharan Africa has 1 psychiatrist per 1 million people. 1 per 1 million. Europe spent $46 per person per year on mental health. Africans spend less than $1. And yet, Europe with its 9 psychiatrists per 100,000 people, with its $46 per capita mental health budget, with its hospitals and its clinics and its therapy hubs, has a mental health crisis. Rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicides in Western Europe are among the highest ever recorded. Now, ask yourself, if the solution to mental illness is more psychiatrists, why does the continent with the most psychiatrists still have a crisis? Because the psychiatrist is not the solution to a problem the system produces. The pressure is the problem. You must pay the bill. You must perform at work. You must project success on social media. You must outdo your neighbor, or at minimum, keep pace. You must be productive. You must be independent. You must carry your grief privately, because publicly displayed pain is weakness. You must. My village had none of these imperatives. You farmed what your strength allowed you. You married what you could sustain. You contributed what you had. And whatever you could not carry alone, the village carried with you. That is not backwardness. That is the most sophisticated mental health infrastructure ever designed. It just was not designed in a laboratory. It was designed over centuries of people learning how to live together without destroying each other. I need to say something carefully here because it is important and it is painful. The village did not collapse on its own. It was dismantled. And one of the primary instruments of that dismantling was the church. Not Christianity as a philosophy of love. The institutional church as a colonial instrument. Because the church that arrived in Africa did not only bring a new God, it brought a new sociology. It taught that the extended family was dangerous, that the village elders practiced darkness, that the uncle in the village was a witch, that the grandmother's help were evil, that the ancestral practice that held the community together was satanic. And generation by generation, people stopped going home. People stopped knowing their cousins. People stopped sitting with their elders. People stopped trusting the wisdom that had governed their communities for centuries. The festive season that once brought every child back from the city to the village, to know their family, to know their roots, to be reminded of who they were, began to feel dangerous. Village people, witches, bad luck. The church did not do this accidentally. Missionary activities across Africa is documented as deliberate cultural suppression. Because the soldiers came in many cases, the missionary came first. They did not just want your labor, they wanted your mind. Because a people who trust their own system are a people who can resist. But a people who have been taught to fear their own grandmother, to suspect their own uncle, to sever themselves from the communal roots that provided psychology, social, and material security, that is a people who are now alone. And alone people are easier to sell things to, easier to control, easier to send to a psychiatrist to fix a problem that the isolation itself produced. Praxis, what the science confirmed. In 2023, the Harvard Study of Adult Development, one of the longest running studies on human happiness ever conducted, tracking individuals over 85 years, published its conclusions. The single greatest predator of long-term mental and physical health was not wealth, not achievement, not education. It was the quality of relationships. People who were more connected to family, friends, and community lived longer, reported more happiness, and experienced significantly less cognitive decline in old age. Loneliness, the study found, is as damaging to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. My village knew this, not from a Harvard study, from centuries of living it. The closeness was not incidental. The communal meals, the shared labor, the children who belonged to everyone, the woman of wisdom who noticed when something was wrong. These were not customs. They were health infrastructure. The researchers are not studying what the village already built. Frantz Fanon, the psychiatrist from Martinique, who treated both colonizer and the colonized in Algeria, wrote in 1961 that colonial psychiatry did not come to heal African minds. It came to manage African behavior within a colonial system. It pathologized resistance. It medicalized grief. It called the trans-state psychosis. It called the ancestral vision hallucination. It called the communal money ritual a failure to individuate. And it left almost nothing behind when the flag came down. What Africa inherited at independence was not a mental health system. It was an administrative ghost, the skeletal remain of a colonial medical structure. This was not designed to serve African population. Part 7, the return. Let me show you what going back actually means. I am not telling you to go back to the village as if time is reversible. I am telling you to go back to the logic. The logic that said, no one carries their crisis alone. The logic that said, your strength is your contribution, not a competition. The logic that said, the child belongs to all of us. The logic that said, the land gives and we share what it gives because none of us made the land. The logic that said, do unto others what you would have done to you, not as a commandment from a church, but as the law by which any dispute between any two people could be judged by any person of character. That logic did not disappear. It was suppressed. It was ridiculed. It was called primitive. It was dismantled piece by piece. First by missionaries who made people fear their grandmothers. Then by urbanization that broke the village apart. Then by an economic system that made survival an individual project rather than a communal one. But the logic is still in us. You feel it when you share food without thinking. You feel it when you cannot pass a struggling person without doing something. You feel it when extended family gathers and something in you that is usually tense goes quiet. That is not sentiment. That is your nervous system recognizing the environment it was built for. Africa does not need to import mental health. Africa needs to recover what it had, update for the complexity of modern life, stop apologizing for the sophistication of what its ancestors built. The last colony is not a territory. It is in the mind that was taught to see its own inheritance as inferior. Decolonize that, and the healing begins not in a clinic, but in the decision to go back to your people. My name is Inye, and what they replaced was working. Tell me in the comments, what did your village have that the modern world has no name for?